So thank you for Susan. This is, I believe, our 20th rally this is now our 5th June. We have 3 more Pride rallies this month. We've had about 20 Pride rallies so far. And usually we talk about values when we have a Pride rally. We talk about love. My Pride bracelet says love wins, and that's a fairly common theme. We talk about being allies. We rarely break news, but today we have news to talk about. We weren't around for Obergefell and other specific moments where things turned for the LGBTQ community. But we're living through one of those moments right now, and here to tell about that is Pastor Michael Cobb.
Woo! With the hill, I don't have to turn this down so that I'm shorter than Rick for it to work. That's kind of cool. Man, there's just so much to say. And what I was thinking was that the things that I have to say kind of boil down to 2 main points. One of which is to tell you about some things that I've seen and some things that I've been part of. And then the other one is the what does it mean for us? And I think that probably I'm not going to say a whole lot about what it means for us that you don't already know at least a little bit. But whenever I come here, I'm encouraged and I'm reminded of things that I know or things that I used to know but maybe forgot a little bit. So I'm hoping that I can help remind you of some things as well. I'm a United Methodist, and that means that every 4 years we get together to discuss the business of the church. And the denomination started in 1968. In 1969, you had the beginning of the modern gay rights movement, and so by 1972, we had to figure out how to react to it. And the way that we reacted to it was to put into our book of rules, it's called the Book of Discipline, that all people are of sacred worth. And as we're getting ready to vote, someone said, I have an amendment. How about we say, except this is incompatible with the practice of Christian teaching? Everyone's like, yeah, okay, let's vote. And then, oh my God, what just happened? And ever since then, there's been a back and forth. It's been a real arms race of finding ways to be more inclusive and more kind and more loving, and finding ways to stamp that out as hard as one could. And I've been to 3 of these worldwide meetings now, 2016, 2019, and 2024. These are weird meetings if you haven't been to one, because they are filled with worship and music and celebration and the churchy stuff. And they're also filled with the sort of legislative maneuvering and Robert's Rule of Orders minutia that makes some people just kind of hate going to meetings. And when you mix them both, it's definitely weird. When I've gone to these in the past, I've gone specifically as a self-identified straight ally to be there to help whatever I can do to help move us a little bit closer to full inclusion. And in our context, that meant full availability of things like marriage to people, whoever they want to marry, and full inclusion of people who believe that God has put a call in their life to respond to that call through ministry in the church. Those were things that were loopholes that were tightened out, and so we were looking for ways first to widen the loopholes, then to create new loopholes, and then eventually let's just get rid of all of that together. Just get rid of all the discrimination together. In 2019 when I went, in 2016 when I went, I told my children I was probably going to get carted away by the cops, because what we had planned on doing was waiting for some discriminatory stuff to happen and then rush the floor and shut it down and lock arms. And at the last seconds, something historic happened, which was some people put forth a motion, which was, how about we just not talk about this now? And then in 2019, that's all we talk about. And so that's what happened. So in 2019, we focused on sexuality issues, and we were shocked and surprised when the voting went towards being more discriminatory and more punitive. I will tell you that that was 2019. There's some things that happened in this country in 2016 that started to happen a little bit again in January of 2021. We started to see, and we're starting to see in our country again right now, it's been ebbing and flowing for about a decade. And one of the things that I learned was that that had infiltrated the church as well, and that's a lot of what we were seeing. I'm a straight white man, and it was so friggin' traumatic. I went home and I was sick for a couple of days. I can only imagine what it was like for my queer sisters and brothers and siblings. And so this year, we met in Charlotte, North Carolina, a little over a month ago, loaded for bear, ready for anything. But two things had happened. One is that in the last couple of years, the people that had been really pushing us towards more and more discrimination said, let's just leave. Let's leave and start our own thing. And that was contentious and that was painful, but by the time we got to last month, they had largely done that. So a lot of the people that were most cruel in their way of trying to interpret rules had left. That's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened, I can't really explain to you. But when it came time to vote on some of these difficult, contentious issues, it wasn't contentious. It wasn't difficult. And when we voted to remove discriminatory language that had been there since before I was in first grade, when the presider said, let's take a break, we ran outside and played drums and waved flags and cried and had umbrellas and a whole lot of media. And it was 52 years worth of trauma just being vented in that moment from so many people. I've been working on this for about 20 years. There are people there that have been working on this for 52 years or longer. And just imagine if you've been holding your breath for 52 years, or if you stepped on something painful and you held in to scream for 52 years. Imagine what that would feel like when you let that out. That's what that was. So when I've gone to these meetings in the past, it's been, you're going into a war zone and you feel it in your heart. You're never really comfortable. This time I went in and it was just filled with joy. Filled with joy. So I know that some of the people that were organizing against LGBT folk had left. What happened with everybody else? Why did the people that did not care, suddenly want to celebrate? Why did the people that would not speak up suddenly want to shout for joy that this thing had finally happened? That's one of the two things that I want to share with you today, is just a little bit of thought about that and what that might mean. And I have notes because I'm up here and I'm thinking, man, this is just so cool, and then I lose track, and then you're like, this guy rambles. His poor church, he rambles. A couple of things. So, if so many people wanted this to happen, what took so long? I have been doing this long enough and screwed up my courage enough that I can say, with a little bit of a flutter, but what happened was money, power, and control. This really had nothing to do with gay people. This had nothing to do with gender identity. This had to do with money and power and control and sacrificing queer folks in order to consolidate money, power, and control. Like I said, there have been things happening in our country since 2016, and they were happening there too, even if some of us couldn't see it until it was too late. So that's one thing. The takeaway from that is we're doing exactly what we need to be doing because we're being vigilant, we're keeping an eye out, we send up the bat signal if anything goes down, and we try to be among the first to be there to point out BS as it happens and to comfort people so that they're not victimized without somebody pushing back a little bit. That's one thing that happens. Something else that happened was a lot of LGBT folks pushed for something, and that was maybe stop talking about us and start talking with us. And this shirt is from a campaign around that. It says, "It's time," with a cross. And the idea is, it's time to stop pretending our LGBTQ siblings aren't there. And it's time to pretend that we understand. We don't. Give them the mic. Let them tell us. And it's time to stop treating them as a problem. It's time to start treating them as beautiful, beloved people who have a place in the, not just have a place in the room. If they're not in the room is impoverished because we miss the beauty and joy and gifts that they bring. So this was something that we did in the church a lot. I did this in the New York, Connecticut area. And I got involved as I could on the national level. And there's a back and a forth. There's a push and a pull. And sometimes you think you're making progress, and sometimes you wonder, where did all the progress go? When Rick asked me to speak, he said, what can I call this? And being a big old nerd, I said, how about UMC Wars, A New Hope? Now, if any of you know anything about the Star Wars movies, the one that came out in 1977 was subtitled A New Hope. And that was part of a trilogy of movies that went from 77 to 80 to 83. And there's a big epic battle of good and evil. And by the end of it, good has triumphed. Good wins, evil loses. The young lovers, they're together. The young idealist, he has now embraced his power. Years later, more movies were made in this sequence, and they really upset people. I'm not talking about the prequels. I'm talking about the ones that came after that said, okay, well, let's check back in on these people a little bit later. And one reason they upset so many people was the young lovers didn't work out. Their kid was deeply troubled, the relationship fell apart, and they weren't really on speaking terms. The young idealist who had embraced his power. Power is hard, and sometimes power can affect you in ways you don't think it's going to affect you. And so by the time we catch up with him, he is a embittered hermit. He wants nothing to do with any of this, because the last time he tried to help people, people got hurt. The lesson, don't try to help people. Just stay out of it, stay on the sidelines. And people said, wait a second, this is my childhood. They're supposed to have lived happily ever after. I'm sharing this because if you've been doing this, even for a couple of weeks, you know that sometimes we have victories. Sometimes good things happen, and we say, that's it, we're done. In 2008, when President Obama was elected, a lot of people said, great, we're done with racism. It's done. And the reason for that is because some of us don't recognize one step for the whole journey. And one step should be celebrated. I'm here to celebrate what my church did today. But here's the thing. That's what the denomination did worldwide. In the local churches, in my local church, they've been avoiding this conversation for years and years and years. So what the legislation says is done. That just means that the local churches finally probably ought to have to deal with it. I could say words other than churches. I could say families. I could say school systems. I could say DEI programs in businesses that say we flew the flag all June. Why are you complaining it came down July 1st? The point there is, don't mistake victory for the end. Take the victories, savor the victories. They are important. But if you check back after a while, and you haven't checked in the meantime, don't be surprised if things look very, very different from how you remember them. Encourage one another. That's really important, because when some of you think, I don't need to be there anymore, I've been doing that for years, things change. Things change. What else? One of the questions that I had is, how do you fix institutional injustice if the institution doesn't believe it exists? Like many organizations, we said we were racist once in the past. We're done with that. We've been sexist. We're done with that. But if you ask the people who aren't white, or the people who aren't the men making the rules, they'll say, we're done with that. That is not my lived experience. That is very different from my lived experience. We should do something about this. Well, we did something about that years ago. That's kind of old. That's not really where we are right now. So the way that you fix that is you kind of got to be impolite sometimes. I started off talking about being ready to go somewhere where I knew security was going to take me away, but boy, that sure makes you hard to miss. That sure makes you impossible to ignore. We're all nice people. We're all brought up to be nice. Sometimes doing the right thing means making people uncomfortable. Sometimes doing the best thing means making people uncomfortable, because the growth that I've made as a person generally doesn't come when everything is perfect and there's nothing to do. It comes when I'm uncomfortable and I need to do something in order to get away from that pain. And when I do that, I find I've grown as a human being. We are all helping people grow as human beings because they're remembering that we exist. Even if they don't like us, we're here. And that's very, very important. There's another thing that I think made a big difference. Many of you probably don't know, I'm one of those weirdos that really likes vinyl records. And so when I had to go to a city I've not been to before, of course, I found time to go to the record store. I scored some great stuff. And while I was in the record store, minding my own business, I heard some of the people at the counter talking, and I didn't catch the beginning of the conversation. But when they talked about, like, what do you think I'm supposed to do? Go to church? And laughing and sort of disparaging the church and all of that, then I realized, oh, they haven't seen me here. And it just so happened that I was wearing this shirt. And when I got my goodies, we called them grails if you like records, when I got my grails up to the counter so that I could pay for them, they got a little quiet. And one of them asked about my shirt, said, what exactly is that a church shirt? And he wasn't being unkind, he was being curious. There's a sidebar lesson. If people are being curious, don't presume they're being unkind. That's a sidebar lesson. And this shirt has two things on it. These colors are for what in my tradition is called the Reconciling Ministries Network, which is a group working for full LGBTQ inclusion in my church. The part below it says Black Lives Matter. And at one of these worldwide gatherings, we actually rushed the floor, shut down legislative conversation, and had a Black Lives Matter protest right in the middle to protest that even though we had repented of the sin of racism in the past, if you ask people affected by it, they say the past is very much here with us. So how did I explain that to these young men? I said, well, yep, I'm part of this church gathering that's coming, and this is because I believe pretty strongly that we ought to modify our rules so that we recognize that everybody is welcome and included, including LGBTQ people. This other part here is because that's not the only people that face discrimination. That's not the only people who are treated poorly just because of who they are. So that needs to be a part of it, too. That caught their attention. We have a word for that. We call that intersectionality. There's other words, but I like that one. And the point is, I don't know how these folks would have felt about either one of these, but seeing these together made sense. And I bring that up now because number one, that's part of our witness. I see respect everyone. I see different colored flags. I see different signs. What you're doing here is pointing out that we're not single issue people. My guess is the people that get angry when they see us out here, they either think we're single issue people or they might be single issue people. But that's not what life is like. Life is complicated and messy, and we have all these issues here, and not everybody here feels the same way out about all of them. But everybody here believes they all have a place here, that they all deserve to be here, and maybe if it's something that you're not so sure about, you can learn more from the people that are representing it. That's another way that you make progress, is by deciding that what matters to me isn't necessarily more important than what matters to you. And if I learn more about what matters to you, I get to know you better as a human being, you get to know me better as a human being, and what we're trying to accomplish is tied up together. That, to me, is, I think, one of the big ways that progress was made. And I told you that this year I was expecting a lot of conflict, and what I found was joy. And I think that's a big part of why.
Oh, okay, it's the last one.
Spoiler alert, that's the last one. I could take off this one too, but that's a different topic that we're not discussing this month. But it could come, it could come. Can you read what it says? What do these look like they're made out of? Legos, thank you. So what I did this time was I didn't go necessarily to do LGBTQ work. I went as part of a group called the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. And the Love Your Neighbor Coalition was a group of about 14 different caucuses that were working on LGBT issues, parents of LGBT people, people with disabilities, people of Native American descent, people of African American descent, lots and lots and lots of things, all coming together to work together because one issue didn't need to mean that the other ones didn't matter. And if we could all support each other, we would probably do better than if we were just all siloed by ourselves. And that's what we did, and I'm convinced that's a lot of why it worked. And I'm convinced that that's part of why there was a general consensus that this was joyful and this was something to be celebrated. because we're not one issue people. And so that means that when we have things that make us all better as human beings, that is worth celebrating. And I think that is why not only the changes happened after 52 years, but why they seem to happen so quickly was because I think we decided that we should all maybe work together a little bit. There's more. Hang on a second. This little sticker says, "Disability is diversity," by the church group that is working on disability rights and disability justice. That's important. This says, "I support Palestinian human rights." Not just any human rights, but Palestinian human rights. That's important. That wasn't why I went, but I was very happy to support that as publicly as I could. This one says, "Living faith, seeking justice, pursuing peace." Because if you don't have the justice, you're never going to make it to the peace. This was for a group called Church and Society that's trying to find ways to take our pretty words and help them change people's lived realities, especially in urban situations. And then this one has racism crossed out, sexism crossed out, homophobia crossed out, ableism crossed out, and then it says just love from the religion and race group. I don't think ableism would have been there 5 years ago. Right now, out of just a couple of things, it belongs there. That's good. I have a couple of extras too. I actually have an extra shirt that I think might be in Rick's size, because I figured that what makes this special is we're doing it together. Whenever someone's not here, someone else is here to hold the sign. And we talk about a lot of different things, and we agree that they all deserve to be brought up here. I don't know if this is Julia's size, but just in case. Two other major things I want to bring up. One of them is that I went there to serve as a chaplain, meaning I'm there to offer spiritual support to people who need it for whatever reason. If you're not familiar with that term, a chaplain is not a missionary. The job is not to convert people, teach people, harangue people, browbeat people. The job is to be with them. And if they want something, you talk about it. And if they need you to be quiet, then you shut up, because that's your job. And I offered to serve in that capacity, and two of the most amazing experiences that I had there were in that capacity. One of them was I was at the table for Link, actually, and remember, this is an international gathering, so two women came by to talk to me, and one of them said, I can translate if anybody here needs to talk Swahili. I can help you talk to them. And the other one said, I can help you translate if anybody needs to speak French. I speak French. And it turns out that one of them was from Kenya. The other one, I think, Angola. And we had amazing conversations. They're both black African women. And we had a conversation about how sometimes people that are trying to push for LGBT rights can sometimes be a little racist against Africans because they see that as one socially conservative group. And we got to talk about how there was a whole panoply of cultures there. And we got to talk about how both of these women were clergy. One of them was divorced. That diminishes her. And I said, but maybe being divorced means that you are specifically qualified to talk to divorced women. Maybe that means that you're qualified in a way that I'm not, because I've never lived those experiences. We had a wonderful time. I have African friends now. I didn't have that a couple months ago. And I look forward to seeing what we can do together. Here's one thing that we might do together. I met another man who, it turns out, has some authority in Kenya. In our tradition, we have what we sometimes call reconciling churches, which means that these are churches that make a very public statement affirming the rights, dignity, and celebrating the worth of LGBTQ people. He oversaw the only two of these churches in Kenya. In a lot of Kenya, that is a very dangerous thing to say out loud. He knew it was a dangerous thing to say out loud. That's why he wanted to say it, because if he didn't, who would? I wonder if there might be an opportunity to support those two churches that are trying to make a safe place for everybody. I saw pictures of trans women in Kenya that were there enjoying a spiritual environment, but also just enjoying a little bit of safety where they didn't have to pretend anything for a little while. I wonder if there's an opportunity to work there. And then lastly, I did a lot of work that ended up being online. How many of you have played online role-playing large video games? I'm so glad Jeremy's here. So what happens, I'm always glad you're here too, brother. So what happens is there are places online where you can log in and create a different identity. And you design your avatar however you want, and you can explore. And I found out that there was a church online called the Young Prophets Collective, where you go online, you design your avatar, and it's a cathedral and gardens. And they did online worship, and I was assigned to be a chaplain there. It turns out that this place was founded by queer teens and 20-somethings from all around the world, including parts of the country where they weren't out to anybody, and they come online for church. Imagine if you don't feel that your outside reflects your inside, and you get to create an avatar, and that's what people see of you. It was amazing. In my church, we lament sometimes that we don't have a lot of young people there. I found them. They're queer. They're open about trauma and drug abuse and challenges and not even being sure about any of this church stuff anyway, but they just like having a place to go to talk to other young queer people where they don't have to pretend to be anything other than what they are. That was one of the most amazing experiences that I've had as a pastor, not just in the past couple of months, because these are people that I would love to have in my church, but they don't know if the church wants to have them, so they made their own. They built their own. And I was invited there as the guest. That's really important. And I guess I'm just going to wrap up with that, because that's one of the things that I think we try to do here. If you want to help somebody, you say, well, I'm not in that community. How do you want to be helped? I think we've made a pretty good effort at that. I think we probably have a reasonably decent track record at that. And I think that that's one of the things that we can do here, not just as a public witness, not just to encourage one another, not just to remind one another, but to empower one another. And when I say one another, whoever you think I'm talking about, draw it wider than that, because I mean anybody can see what we do, they can copy it, they can join us, they can ask for support, and in doing that, that's how you change the world. Because you make sure that people know who you are, that they know the struggles, and that none of that matters more than just that they're a person. Doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't mean we pretend to be colorblind, come on. But it does mean that the respect is there and doesn't have to be asked for, and they don't have to wonder if they're respected. Oh, I wore my socks today. They don't have to wonder if they're safe. They don't have to wonder if they're valued, because we tell them, and that's what you do every time you're out here. And that's why I'm glad to be here. I guess the last thing I'll say is I apologize. I'm going to leave real soon, because today is the second ever Danbury Pride, and I live and serve in Danbury now. And I've also met some guys who expressed some interest in going to Danbury Pride, and I took a guess, and I said, you know what, if you're not really comfortable, how about if I go with you? You don't have to be there by yourself. I think there's a motto in there somewhere, but I think I'm done with my time, so thank you all very much, and thank you for doing what you do.